Hey teachers, welcome back to part 4 in our video series here at Teacher's Pet, where I am doing a show and tell, really reviewing, reflecting, breaking down, and explaining my very kind of alternative, ungraded, kind of focused on student choice, universal design for my general ed sort of project based writing course from spring 2025. So this said is number 4 in that series. The first video just kind of gave some background context on the class. The second video focused on the just overall structure and how I set up my syllabus. The third video was on participation points and how I set up the readings and just weekly homework in my class sessions. And now we are talking about the graded projects, the bigger assignments for the class. I'm excited to kind of reflect and go back through it. Overall, a lot of things worked really well and had strong feedback, and we will look over some of the course eval comments about the projects. But that is also a place where, a lot of students found it more difficult and challenging, and I definitely did have comments saying like, ooh, maybe you should rethink parts of it. And so we'll really just be talking through kind of the project structure, and I'll walk through my project page because every single assignment was set up kind of in the same way and had the same values, to hopefully just give you a show and tell of what I chose to do with some commentary on what I saw working well and what maybe you would want to avoid if you were doing or trying to redesign your class, for a little bit of that inspiration and conversation and discussion. I'm really excited, and yeah, leave a comment or question with anything that you see while you're like watching the video. Share this with another teacher, professor, grad student who's trying to build and redesign their own classes. And I really would also love to know what it is that you like to do in your class, how you set up your projects, your rubrics, your grading, something interesting that either helped you this semester or that you are thinking about changing. All right, I'm going to flip my camera angle over and we'll hop into my Canvas shell to explore my project setup in my XP-based, high choice, high agency, ungraded Gen Ed classroom. All right, so I am back in my student view for that Canvas shell Canvas course, so we can see, exactly what my students could see and had access to over this last semester, focusing in on the projects. And so, from the homepage, again, I would do the weekly checklist where I could put the major projects that were coming up in that unit, so they always had quick access to it there. But they also always on the homepage had access to this projects area. First, with my projects, how I set it up, and this is where that kind of more ungrading ideas kind of came into play. This class was not out of 100%, so it wasn't one of those you have to do every single thing that's assigned and try to get a perfect score right in order to have your good grade. Instead, I really built in choice. And so what that looked like, and how I literally explained it to my students, is that the class is structured like a video game. You choose how to earn your XP, your points, with quests, the assignments and projects to level up your letter grade. And so they got to pick and choose how they wanted to accrue those points. Every 10 points of XP, so there's 10 points they earned in my class, leveled them up 1 letter grade. And so that's also where, everybody started at 0 to build up. But instead of the traditional 100% structure where, 0 to passing is 60%, 60 points, if you're out of 100. And that's quite a big, gap. Whereas then from, a D to a C is only 10 points, 10 points. So I did just condense the scale. So every single letter was the same 10 points. So that way it wasn't quite such a big hole for people to dig themselves out of. and not even a whole because they just, started, and then we're continuing. So 10 points meant that they were then passing with the D, though for most of the students in this class, they actually needed to have a C for, credit earning grade in their degree tracks. But 10 points is a D, 20 points got them to that C. 30 points was a B, now an A, and at my university there's no A plus, so there's only A minus and A. And so an A requires 40 points, so a 4.0, right, corresponding with those, with at least 4 points in each of the 5 assignment categories. And with the assignment categories, these group 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then group 6 was kind of general, and I think that was also confusing for students. So I would rename them to be, like skill 1, skill 2, skill 3, skill 4, skill 5, and then just general points. And so that way it could be in your 5 skill your skill groups, your skill branches, which then also would better relate to how I was explaining it like a video game with your character's skill tree. But basically, I wanted it to be that way, and explained it to them so that way, as an intro level course, right, to get an A, you need to have tried and been reasonably, successful, like have completed successfully all of the introductory skill sets for my topic and subject. And so somebody could get 40 points if they, really front loaded their work in the semester and then completely skipped the back end skills. And so, yeah, you got 40 points, but you didn't do all of these, right, nice introductory concepts. So there I kept them at a B plus. So you obviously did a lot of work and you understand enough to have accrued that many points, but not in a well-rounded way. So I kind of think of it as write a nice balanced skill tree. So that way your character can handle all the different quest types, all the, bosses well enough. So basically you have tried and understand enough about all the big skills in my field to then go on to the more advanced courses later. And they could complete any combination. So there's no penalty for missing or skipping or even doing like poorly on an assignment in terms of, right, in in that 100% system. If you failed an exam, suddenly it's like, well, you really can't make it up unless you get like 100% on everything in the future, and it just, I don't think it's realistic. So there's no penalty that way. Of course, there is then more the incentive to do well is accrue your points faster and hit your goals. And the way that I set up the points and kind of really spent a lot of time figuring out how much each would be worth to apply, right, enough pressure toward, like, yes, to get an A you need to do things well and make sure you are doing all of the work. But if somebody, really just doesn't care, they only want like a C, there was a lot of pathways that they could do that without being overly stressed. Because they know that their other classes, frankly, give them enough stress as it is. So they needed an A. They had a lot of choices. I also implemented one revision option. So if they did do poorly on something, at the end of the semester, they could, go back and fix their work there and get up to full credit, depending on, how well they fixed it. And then also one super extension. So at the end of the semester, if they realize, oh man, I really should have done, a medium project in skill 2, they could go back and do that to make sure they got the grade that they wanted. And so with the skill tree, the groups, group 1, they corresponded to the units in the first 3, and then the bottom 3 were kind of going across units basically. So the first one was description. So can they describe, technical content information? Again, that just goes back to some of my key learning outcomes. And there were 4 project options, a big, a medium, and then 2 small. And that's pretty much the structure I carried. So the second unit, big, medium, 2 small. Now group 3 changed a bit because, reporting is just such a big learning outcome. There's a lot of outcomes associated to this unit. And so there were 2 big projects, but they had to do either or because, writing 2 10-page long research heavy reports, just isn't feasible. In the past, I had, allowed students to try to attempt both, and over again, I got, half completed submissions. So I said, no, it is a forced choice. If you're going to do the big one, pick one or the other, and then just two media projects. So I didn't have any small projects for this one, which is something that I would change, and I would find some smaller options. And that was actually some of the feedback that I got in my course evaluations as well. Like, wow, the last unit, broke away from our small, medium, big structure. And that was, kind of challenging, and it would be nice to mm, keep consistent with that. And so I'll be thinking about how I could go back and do that, and maybe having the small projects actually also tie in to the bigger ones. Like maybe the small projects are an annotated bibliography about your topic or something like that. And then group four was media. So in my field, it is good that they are introduced to multimedia ways of communicating. And so within every unit, then they had basically a video project option, and they only needed to do one. And actually really only could do one. So I also just wanted to emphasize and provide that structure and path of like, yes, you need to try one video. That got progressively easier actually, but you only really need to do one, and because it is part of the writing core, you can't get all of your points from video. And so I set it up to where the first video was the hardest. And when they were trying to decide which option they wanted to do, I made sure to leave a little note saying kind of how difficult that video challenge would be. So this first one, at the very beginning of the semester, when it was like, yo, this is for you that maybe have your own YouTube channels already and are used to vlogging and creating videos. And so here's just a way for you to get your media points, build on what you already know how to do. And so I just didn't have a lot of time to offer support because, we were busy with getting everything else in the semester. Now, even with that, note, I need to find a design to like make it stand out. I still had a lot of students who are like, well, this was so hard and you didn't help us. And I'm like, well, yeah, because this first option was for those with already a lot of experience and equipment. Like I told you to wait if you've never made a video before. So I need to just kind of find a way to make sure to explain that to them a little bit more clearly so they can match up their skills. So the first one was really hard, and then it got easier. The second one was, just making a tutorial video, so a little bit mid-hard, but since it was in the second unit where we'd had more time and I actually, had showed them more techniques and tools. The third one was the kind of like the easiest in terms of technical know-how and what most of my students pick, because it was just a recorded presentation, and so they were able to just use kind of the basic presentation recording tools that came preloaded into like our Microsoft 365 suite, and so they could just practice giving presentations. And then the fourth was kind of a last chance portfolio project. And the last chance portfolio project, I actually do have the basic assignment idea up on the Teacher's Pet Shop as a freebie if you're interested in it. I really like it because they build a digital portfolio, which is important as we, I think, keep moving forward. The job market, right, I think will continue to be more project-based hiring, like what have you actually completed and how can you explain it, as, resumes and applicant tracking systems and stuff, kind of become further and further automated, they maybe might start losing more and more value. And so I think it'll be important for our students to have a good portfolio of actually what they've accomplished ready to go, just in case the landscape of how they get hired and show their value changes. And so for this, I did just ask them, hey, go back through your whole semester and give me, explain, right? 5 different concepts and put it in your portfolio. Use the projects you completed to explain it. And I did have quite a few students, complete that one as sort of their last chance media project that they found the most valuable. And then after the media, there's the participation. So this, of course, went across the whole semester. And they had basically 12 points from that, plus an additional 3 for attending labs. And we talked about that in video number 3 of the series with the participation points. So that was just carried all semester. And then lastly, I had group 6 of just sort of general points that contributed to their total success in the course, but not one of their specific skill tree areas. And again, I think that kind of confused some students, so I will be thinking about how I can, just kind of re-explain how these are just, just general XP, to make sure they were getting where they wanted to go. So that's how I set up all of my projects themselves. Now my course building spreadsheet, again, you can grab this template in the teacher's pet shop. But I just laid it out to basically have, okay, all their due dates landed on the same day at the end of every unit to enforce them to make choices. I really wanted them to practice and actually have a chance to practice their agency and systems thinking. Okay, if I make a choice here, how does it contribute down the road instead of just sort of like a little robot doing exactly what I tell them to do? Because that was one of our learning outcomes, was encouraging analytical thinking, problem solving, systems thinking. So I set up my class to force them to do that. And so I wanted them to choose. Do you want to do a big project, takes longer, is harder, worth more points? Or do you want to do small projects, easier, faster, worth fewer points? As I went along through all of the groups. And so there ended up being basically 73 points. My spreadsheet in Canvas, it turned into 75 points because I just added some other little like bonus things that came up during the semester. And they only needed 40. So while I was figuring out like how much everything should be worth, I was thinking, okay, what would be the path to an A? And so the most efficient way for students to get an A was to get 41 points by doing all of the big projects, again, completely successfully earning max points on that, which would get them 26, plus doing all of their participation over the semester. So just keep up with weekly participation, do the big projects. That's the most efficient way to get an A, and then everything else, kind of trickle down after that. And using kind of the point calculation that way, I think helped me create overall a very balanced. Like I am happy with how the point amount kind of played out and how much everything was worth over kind of overall. So in terms of what my project pages actually looked like, and they all followed this exact same structure, all had this exact same amount of content. And so like in my prep tracking sheet, you can see, okay, for every assignment, and I didn't go back and like update these, but some of them, were done. But every single assignment, right, I did make sure to give students, obviously, what are the main requirements, a downloadable version of those requirements, in case I want to print it, save it, whatever. A rubric, obviously. Every one, I gave them my example, so that way they, at least had something for me. Templates that they could download and use, and I gave them a Word version and a Google Doc version, so whichever system they were using. Where available, I gave them a student example. Some of these projects, I thought of brand new and was like piloting them for the first time this semester, so I didn't have necessarily an example to give them, but I did go out and find like professional versions, which works well for my class, like technical writing, kind of business comm. I'm able to go and find those professional examples of every genre and project type. That, of course, might be harder and is harder when I teach other, maybe topics and classes. I did write pages in what I called the project manual. That was my OER, like textbook, kind of like course pack, basically, with just additional tips and steps and ideas. An FAQ page, which I definitely used Gemini to help me make these FAQs. I basically fed it my, requirements, my downloadable assignment sheet. It was like, act as a very confused student, like identify what questions might be. So that was really helpful. And then I gave them a project checklist. So they had loads and loads and loads and loads of support to complete all these projects and make the best choice. So all my project pages, and I think I will redesign these a little bit, which I'll talk about in next week's video, all the things I would redesign. But I do like this base structure. I think it worked well. I did have really good feedback from the course evaluations. Right. They felt like, yeah, they made it possible for me to increase my knowledge, skills, understanding, and I attribute that to the way I set up the projects to align very specifically with different pieces of content. I got, I'm really happy. I have very high marks with exams and grade assignments were clearly related to the course content. So I'm extremely proud of that kind of mean score and it being, quite high compared to the rest of my university. So I'm really excited. I did find the workload like a little bit hard, but it's a writing project class. It's going to be as hard as it's going to be basically. And so, People felt like detailed and useful grading comments with clear, feedback. So that's great. And we'll look at exactly what the rubrics were like there. Um, Clear expectations. Everything was laid out really well. So I do know I don't want to change too much about my assignment pages because those were definitely bright spots that came up in a lot of the comments. And really where people were more confused when they did often comment, I feel like that sometimes like the assignment sheets had too much. It was like overwhelming, but also low key that's part of the goal of this class is, do you have good strategies to read through and handle kind of dense, technical, potentially overwhelming situations that comes into your problem solving, analytical abilities, systems thinking, resiliency. So, I'll be kind of pondering that as I sort of go through just to help, kind of clarify. And people were like, yeah, it would be nice to have a traditional structure because it's easier. It's like, well, yeah, but I'm not going to do that just because it's easier. And I think this comment really exemplified that. I would have preferred traditional structure with a definite list of assignments, but the self-efficacy objective behind planning and selecting our work was a rare, necessary wake-up call, especially if this was earlier in my curriculum. This class is 2000 level, so I think there's just happened to be one of course, get students that kind of had put off this class for a while, but it's that was like that's the reason why I chose this non-traditional kind of structure. So I was really glad. But yeah, somebody would say, too much in my project descriptions, I could overwhelm people. But it's like, get used to navigating harder information. So I'll be kind of pondering that. So anyway, the project went well, so let's actually look at my pages were like. So this was my tutorial e-booklet project. Basically, every single assignment, I told them how many points they could earn with it, what it represented, the due date right up top. I also put the due date and the points inside of the title itself, so it would show up that way on their calendars and to-do lists to try and, again, give them at every chance, like, here's what you are working towards. And I did have this color coding system, so that way they could know what group it would go into. And so, yellow squares was group 1, blue circles was group 2, orange diamonds was group 3. Then I just had this like kind of camera icon for the media group and a book icon for participation and then a star icon. So it was color plus, shape and logo to try to make sure that accessibility was there. So all of that was kind of, right up here in their original data. Then I always gave them a scenario, and the scenario actually came back around to my rubric. There were some points of like, okay, did you understand the scenario? Kind of like how we would have to do like word problems, right? And, elementary, middle school math, where it's like, do you understand? You have the concepts, but can you also analyze and process through a scenario? So for this specific one, it said, okay, our technical writing firm, that's how I always started it, introduced it to the students at the beginning of the semester, like, imagine you are an intern for this technical writing firm. So every project, right, is going to be related to that as you're like learning and trying to complete work. So our firm was hired by like new student orientation at a university, and that just kind of gave them that mental framework of what they're making and who they're making it for. And then the details of like what they want, what don't they want, right? What's kind of the scope of work that this client is asking these technical writers to create, and kind of putting it in forms of a contract. And then I had the downloadable PDF copy. Okay, so after the scenario and the downloadable, then it was always organized into a step 1, pre-project planning, a step 2, project development, and a step 3, project assessment before the final product is submitted. And these just align with the project management cycles that, we were learning about and was trying to help teach them. Students who, got an A and turned in really strong work, it was very clear, and then in chatting with them in like office hours, that they did as intended. Step 1, let me like understand all the stuff for my project before moving on and reading things in step 2. That is how I had set it up, but I do think I want to adjust for how people actually used it. But step one was always pre-project planning, where they learned what they actually had to do. And so for my students, they had to set up, we called the campsite, just understand your context, goals, and asks. And again, it's very explicit, like based on the scenario up front, here's what you are being asked to do. So they should have understood that, kind of practice on their own, but then, kind of like here's like the answer key of the asks you should have understood about your workplace scenario. The audience, for my field, that was very important. That might not matter as much for your specific topics and concepts, but part of what they're being asked to do is like, can you write in these different specific styles to match your audience? So I explained who the audience is, what style I expected, with links back to my OER textbook where they had notes right about that content. The message, the actual purpose. So I gave them, here's kind of your purpose statement, what you are creating. And then here's all the different, kind of sections I expect in this project to fulfill that purpose. And then I also gave them some topic ideas in case they got stuck. And all the topic ideas would, of course, match then the scenario for them. And then last, for the product, and again, I gave them links of like, hey, remember, this is the genre you're writing. Here's, just some more information. And I tried to pull these from more industry focused blogs. So they had my explanation from our textbook, but then also linking out to more industry ways of applying it in the genre every single time. So that way they knew this is what you're making. Here's resources on how to make it. And then any tools for the project, just little videos and stuff just to kind of help them out, which is where I also would put links to my, back to our course pack for that specific project. So then after they understood and like set up their campsite, it's like, okay, next step is actually finding the graded requirements. I think a lot of students were a little frustrated with how to find this info. And so I do want to adjust how they can like get to it while still balancing the like, well, yeah, you're frustrated because you aren't actually planning your project kind of along, a nice cycle and going through kind of the stages of info. So I just want to balance that. But, I just gave them, hey, here's literally the list of things I'm grading you on. And then here's kind of a condensed version of the rubric with some additional links back to our notes, our note-taking guides, examples, that kind of stuff. So that way they knew, hey, you need to be able to reflect. Here's your skill. Here's what it means for you to earn all XP. Here's what you need to do. And here's like tools to help you accomplish that. And I just, made sure to write the rubric in that very kind of clear way, or I tried to do it very clear, connected to the skill and how to earn it. And that's where I use the Teacher's Pet app to help me, kind of pull out that initial language. That way I could spend more of my time and energy just revising the rubrics. And I had really great comments and eval scores about those. And so I do think it helped. And then last, I gave them the skills and outcomes in very like workplace ways. So, I'm like, hey, listen, here's what you should focus on. Can you write these commands, direct action? And then how these genres and this type of project, would apply to their careers. Okay, so then once they got through all the like actual pre-project planning, here's what you need to know and do for your project. Then we got into the step 2 development, and here is where I offered them templates so they could download a Word doc or a Google template. And then I gave them an example. So I always made my own example that then they could download so they could see, okay, here's what, my professor did and kind of what they're expecting, what she's expecting. And then while I was making my example, I just did a screen recording just of me, doing the process. And then I was able to turn that screen recording that I'd captured into video content. And so I sped it up. And just kind of did that speed build style, gave commentary, additional kind of tips, advice, explanations as the commentary, while they could watch me literally create the example. So they could look at the final product example, watch a video of my process, get some more tips and whatnot. And I did that for every project, had that kind of option and set up there. I'm like, you see, even with this one, right? It's like only 42 views. I had 60 students in my class. So, obviously not everyone is using it, but I know it's available, and that honestly makes it easier when I am grading, and then I'm debriefing with them and being like, okay, well, what resources did you actually use? Like, if you were a little bit stuck, why didn't, right? You, in part of your problem solving, look through the examples, like watch the video and see, and, and having that conversation. Yeah, I feel like puts a little less pressure on me as a grader because I would feel really bad. Often I used to feel bad taking points off for things, even though that's my job. And now I don't feel bad because I'm like, you had so many resources to like do this, to figure this out and find a way to accomplish the goal. So now it's more pointing to where they could improve their own process to get the outcomes they wanted. Yeah, then I gave them student samples, which I just linked out to this whole page. So that way they could go find student examples for like all the projects. And of course, getting permission from past students to share those, and I redacted the student info, that kind of stuff. And then last, workplace examples, again, for every single project, kind of finding just examples of, real manuals, tutorials. They can try and connect, the dots between what they're doing in this foundational classroom mock situation to like how these things show up kind of out in the professional world. And then step 3 was project assessment, where I actually recorded little podcasts of me explaining everything in the rubric. So then they could actually listen to this grading note while they were doing a final check of their work. And in the grading note, I also had the transcript for them to read if they didn't want to listen. It went just step by step through the rubric, what I was looking for, where most people go wrong or astray, and again, kind of more tips and support. So I did expect them to listen to that while they, were reviewing their work, with this little checklist of, hey, by the way, have you checked on the genre? Did you know your purpose? Visuals, again, linking little resources if they needed it, for copy editing and for that various validation kind of checks and stuff. So trying to get them again to that place of, especially with ungrading, a lot of it is, don't just take the word of like professor as authority assessing your work. Take ownership and assess your own work. And here's the things that, we're going to be looking for. And you should be holding yourself more accountable. Like, you are capable, you have the knowledge to really look at your own work. And then if you see something is wrong, change it before you submit it. And that's kind of a constant, honestly, uphill battle, but I appreciate the ungrading philosophies in nurturing that with students. And then last, I just gave them instructions on how to submit it. Honestly, I have found with especially the newer kind of years of students, a lot of them like don't even know how to save their files in different formats. I think because of the kind of shift in K through 12 to doing, everything in their Google Classrooms and clouds, they're just kind of like sharing access, which is great. Like, that is definitely a key thing. But oh my gosh, so many students are like, I don't know how to, they just don't know. So I decided to go in and give them, hey, here's how you save your projects as a PDF in a few different ways. Here's why I want a PDF, because it just works nicely with my LMS. Here's how you can combine different files since they do have 2 different things they're working with. Here's some instructions on uploading to Canvas with help guides, just trying to give them everything they need. And then a note on viewing feedback. So the feedback I gave for every single project, they had their core feedback in the rubric. That was the main place that they needed to look for info. Then I'd give them a general comment with kind of a, strength, weakness, or strength, potential revision is how I framed it. So that way, if they wanted to use the revision opportunity, they knew really what they should focus on and fix. And then a link being like, hey, schedule a meeting with me if you want to go, line by line, page by page through your project. So I have personally moved away from basically line editing, and leaving really, really extensive feedback on everyone, because frankly, most people just don't read it. They only really look at the rubric, and it felt like a waste of my time. And so now I dedicate that time in, long office hour chats, which, yeah, it's like longer per paper maybe, but I know that the student who took the time to meet with me really wants to actually improve and understand what's going on. And everybody else seems content with the way that I give them feedback in their rubric, and general comments. Plus, again, I give them that link back to the grading note so they can again listen to this like 15-minute long podcast of me being like, here's exactly what I was looking for. Check yourself in the rubric as I go through. So that's what every single project looked like. And then last, just, yeah, my rubrics. As we had mentioned, I just make sure to focus on a key skill happening in there. And then I just did a functional, developing, and in draft rating. I think in the future, I actually want to adjust the categories of my rubrics just a little bit. So we'll talk about that in the next video with things I might adjust and revise. But I did like how it turned out. And so basically it's either you did it functionally, like you did good enough, so you get your full points, like you did what I asked. I didn't have like a exceptional to get full points. Like if you did the expectation, you got full credit on that skill. You tried, I see the effort, it just, doesn't quite match up, you get half credit, or, it's just too far off the mark or you skipped it completely, no credit per skill. And so that's how they could get partial credit, because maybe they did a lot of good things, but then they just forgot, to talk about digital accessibility or whatever. And then at the end, after the main skills, I had, did you use editing tools and techniques? And that was just a functional or like 0 points, basically. Like it's either, yeah, cleanly written and all that kind of stuff, or it's not. And then last, I had this one that I still like and I think will always keep of, did you fill expectations of the client contract? Because again, for my class, one of those learning outcomes is being able to produce work for a clear professional scenario. And it definitely had students that it's like they did good work and so they got like credit and everything, but they just completely ignored what the client was asking. And so I wanted to have that mechanism of, rewarding and encouraging, paying attention to what is actually being asked of you. To help like kind of stand out, but also respecting, like, I mean, this is a classroom, so if you just really want to go off and do your own thing, like they could choose to do that and still be practicing the core skills. So that's just kind of what that last one looked like for me. It was definitely, pretty quick to be able to go through and do that. And it seemed to be, again, based on what students said, very clear for them to understand, okay, when they got it developing, it's like, okay, well, what was, missing? Kind of, oh, it's because I tend to write irrelevant issues. And usually if it was developing, then again, I'd say like, hey, your question number 2, blah, 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 that they liked to do. The last thing I just wanted to show you was, in the assignments, kind of how, that looked. So I had different, my groups, so that way I could easily kind of see the points. And they actually earned, and I set it up so my grading scheme, instead of, having ABCD regular grading scheme, it showed either a draft, so, they just didn't quite hit that complete area, a skipped, or complete, or a top work. So that way when they were in their grade book, and this is where most people were like, ooh, this was confusing just to like navigate and figure out, because they did have to force Canvas to do something frankly Canvas doesn't want to do. But through their grade book, you can see there's like 75 total points. My test student account earned 32, so that was worth a B. And as we go through, they see, okay, 6 points total, top work, and then they can look back over the rubric for it. And as they scroll down to the bottom is where they could see then their point totals overall. And unfortunately, and I will have to figure out how to make Canvas not do this if possible. Like this first column is confusing because it shows them like a sort of differentiated weighted version, but the second column is their true points earned. So right, to get an A, they would have needed 4 points in every category plus 40 overall. So this is how I kept track of it and they could keep track of it. And I will have to figure out, just a way to like simplify or make it easier for students to keep track of, or just like remind them more often. And so they can know, oh, I need to go back and do a project, in group 3 or whatever. So that way they could see kind of their total points. And then I did round, everything up to the nearest, just like point total at the end. And so yeah, overall, I really, really loved, and I like this system. It has obviously some quirks that I will go back and revise. I really like how it felt grading it. I liked everything I was able to produce for them. I like what they produce in terms of their project work. And I feel pretty good about kind of the outcomes that the students were able to get out of it. All right, thanks for following along on that show and tell. I know it's a little bit longer because there's just so much that goes into projects to discuss. Now, next week we will kind of finish up this show and tell series with just a video. Really, I'm going to talk about and kind of show how I'm redesigning some things, rethinking some of the structure. I'll show off some of my sort of new page and course layout designs that I definitely think will address some of the challenges that I saw, some of the comments, right, that I was getting from students just to iterate and further improve. So I hope that you join me for that video because I'm pretty excited about it. And until then, definitely let me know what you are working on, what you're teaching, what you are designing for your own classes. And yeah, it's that time of the semester, of the summer, of the year to kind of build those classes. So until then, I hope that you have a great class or a great time prepping your classes. Bye, teachers.